Welcome back to Game Programming with Unity. In this short piece, I'm just going to show you a little system to help you organize your physics collisions. A lot of times you have some things you want to collide with other things and other things that you would like to not collide with things. So we're going to set up a quick collision layering system. Over here, we haven't really looked at this yet, but we have a system of layers, right? And layers are just organizational structures, which we can place stuff into. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple layers, and then we're going to layer physics interactions with those layers. All right, so let's just go here to layer, and let's click on add layer. It doesn't matter what you have selected over here as an object. You can have nothing selected. You can select something. Basically what you want to do is make sure that you're adding new layers, and you're going to look at these layers as numbers. We'll talk about tags later, and tags are a little bit different. But we have an ability to create these different types of layers. All right, so I'm going to add a new one. I'm going to call this player. This is a pretty important layer because most of the interactions in the game are going to be with your player, and so there are certain times when you want to be able to turn off an interaction or to only allow the player to interact with certain objects. All right, and then we're going to create a wall layer, and then we'll create, let's say, floor layer. All right, so now we have a player, a wall layer, and a floor layer. And I'm going to create one more called a cube layer, and that's just so we can stick some of these in here and see them interact or not interact. All right, so we've created our layers. Now let's choose our layers. Now you see they show up on our layer option, so every object I select, I can now come in and say, all right, I'm going to give this object, and I can do this multiple times. And that's actually the wall. Let's put those in the cube layer. Let's put this, and I'm going to name this now floor. It's a really good idea to start naming your objects what they are, even if you're doing demo scenes, because then you really know what's what. And we'll put our wall in the wall layer, and finally our iGuy parent, and let's call that player. All right, so we've got our layers. Now it's going to ask me right here if I want to change the layers of the children. And yes, actually I do. Generally speaking, your children should have the same layers as your parent object, because obviously we have multiple objects under this. And so whatever you want to move with or interpenetrate with certain things, usually you want to change all of the things below it. It's not always necessary, but I try to make it consistent. Okay, so now that we have those layers, what do they mean? Well, let's go to our edit project settings and physics, and see you here. Here you have all these layers. We have them in the vertical and the horizontal. And what I can do now is choose what gets interacted with what, or what collides with what. It's pretty simple, but it's just a really nice way to say, let's turn off all collisions between one type of object and another. So let's just say that I don't want the floor and the cubes to interact. So here we can find cube and floor. Let me just turn that off. Now what do you think is going to happen when we turn that on? Well, they're all going to fall. All of the active rigid body objects are going to fall right through that floor. Why? Because they're no longer interacting. So what if we say I don't want the cube, which is right here, and the walls to interact? Okay, what that means is I can push this cube right through that wall. Now, of course, one of the things is that I'm going to hit that wall and the character, but that cube can interpenetrate the wall. And if this guy still has the ice on it, there we go. Now you should see that fly right through that wall. There it goes. All right, now the character still interacts with the wall, but the wall and the cubes do not penetrate. Or excuse me, do not keep themselves from penetrating. So they do not interact. They do not collide. All right, so we could go further. I could say, look, here's my player, and I don't want the player to interact with the wall anymore. And now the player would also go through that wall. So it's just a really good way to sort out interactions between various objects in your scene, which is important when you have a very complex scene. Let's just turn the play off. When you have a very complex scene and you want to have certain things set up with physical properties to interact with other things, but you find that there are too many things in the scene interacting with too many things. Sometimes you don't want certain objects to be stopped by the floor. Sometimes you want the player to be able to pass through certain things, but an enemy can't pass through a certain thing. So that's why we set up these collision layers, so we can really manage and organize things that interact physically with other objects.